Life can be unpredictable, right? One minute everything's fine, and the next you're hit with something devastating. An illness, a job loss, a tragedy in your community. So how do we get through those moments that throw us into crisis? Well, today we're going to dig into the really important difference between a crisis and trauma. And we're going to explore this powerful idea that our greatest strength isn't about standing alone, but about standing together.
Just take a moment to absorb these words from author and counselor Thelma Duffey. It's September 11th, 2001. Her son is a student near the World Trade Center, and her husband is in Washington, D.C. But she's stuck in Texas, hundreds of miles away, just glued to the TV, watching these graphic, horrifying images over and over. It's such a powerful reminder that these big world events, they aren't just headlines. They're deeply personal, and they can shake us right to our very core.
You know, we throw the words crisis and trauma around a lot, often using them like they mean the exact same thing, but they don't. And getting a handle on that distinction, that's the first, absolutely vital step toward making sense of the pain and ultimately finding a way to heal.
Okay, so think of it like this. A crisis is the event itself. It's the storm hitting. It's immediate, overwhelming, and totally unpredictable. But trauma is a potential response to that storm. It's a much deeper injury that can leave lasting effects on both our mind and our body. Let's look a little closer at each of these.
So a crisis is that moment that just pulls the rug out from under you. It could be a scary medical diagnosis, a sudden divorce, getting laid off from your job. It's something that completely overwhelms our usual ways of coping and makes us feel like the world isn't safe. And while they're incredibly difficult, crises are, for better or worse, a pretty common part of being human.
Trauma, on the other hand, is what can happen in the aftermath of a crisis. It's not just an event, it's an injury. A deep emotional, mental, and even physical wound that comes from an intensely negative experience. It results in these profound stress reactions that can really take over our entire being.
And this, right here, is probably the most important thing to grasp. Not every crisis leads to trauma. A crisis is a thing that happens to us. Trauma is one possible outcome within us. And understanding that is huge, because it means trauma isn't a given. It means that with the right kind of support, there's a path through the storm.
So, if connection is the key, why do we so often feel like we have to go through these things completely alone? Well, it's because for a very long time, our culture has been telling us a story about what it means to be strong, and that story might actually be holding us back from healing.
For decades, we've been handed this script, right? The whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps ideal of rugged individualism. A lot of traditional psychological theories really push this idea that you had to separate yourself from others and be stoic to grow. Reaching out for help or showing you were in pain, that was seen as a weakness. And it's important to remember, this model was built on theories that pretty much ignored the real-life experiences of women and other marginalized groups.
So this old, tired script forces us to ask a pretty radical question. What if everything we've been taught about going it alone is just wrong? What if our greatest strength isn't found in our independence at all, but in our dependence on each other? And that very question is what launches us into a whole new way of thinking. It's a new path forward that's based on a framework called relational cultural theory. And honestly, it completely reframes how we think about strength, resilience, and what it truly means to heal. So this theory, relational cultural theory, or RCT for short, was developed by scholars at the Jean Baker Miller Training Institute. And it basically argues that we are, fundamentally, wired for connection. We aren't designed to grow and thrive in isolation. Real, meaningful growth doesn't happen by separating from others, but by building authentic, mutual, and empowering relationships.
Let's break this down into 3 simple core ideas.
First, we are literally wired to connect. Modern neuroscience actually shows this in our brain structures. Second, we don't just exist in relationships, we grow in them. Those mutually rewarding connections are the very fuel for our development. And third, real strength isn't about putting up a wall. It's about authenticity. It's the courage to be your whole, real self within those relationships.
Now, a really central piece of this theory is a huge shift in how we think about power. It asks us to move away from a power-over dynamic, which is all about control, hierarchy, and exploitation, and move toward a power-with dynamic.
That's a model built on sharing power, on mutuality, on genuine connection, where every single person's experience is valued.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but what does it actually look like in the real world? When the rubber meets the road, how does this idea of connection transform some of the most unimaginable pain into real, positive change?
Let me tell you the story of David. He was a 16-year-old boy who died by suicide after being relentlessly bullied. His family was plunged into the deepest crisis imaginable. But here's what they did. Instead of isolating in their grief, they connected. They reached out, they told their story, and they turned their pain into action. And their community? They rallied around them. Together, that collective, connected effort led to David's Law being passed in Texas, a landmark law to protect kids from cyberbullying. It is just a profound, real-world example of what relational resilience looks like.
In this relational approach isn't just for families or individuals. It can transform entire systems. That's the whole idea behind something called trauma-informed care, or TIC. It's a model where an entire organization, we're talking a school, a hospital, a company, shifts its whole perspective. Everybody, from the CEO down to the maintenance staff, recognizes how common trauma is and works together to create an environment of safety, trust, and healing.
This relational way of thinking even changes how we approach ethics. You see, traditional principle ethics is all about rules. It asks the question, what should I do? But relational ethics asks a totally different, and I think much deeper question, who should I be? The focus moves away from a checklist of abstract rules and toward compassion, context, and the actual human relationship that's right there in front of you.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, this huge shift toward connection is sparking all kinds of innovation. It's offering some real, tangible hope for healing in a world that, let's face it, desperately needs it.
We're seeing some really exciting new tools emerging because of this. Things like neurofeedback, which actually helps people learn to regulate their own brain activity. Virtual reality is being used to create safe, controlled spaces for people to work through and gain a sense of mastery over stressful events. And of course, mind-body practices like yoga and meditation are finally getting the recognition they deserve for their power to connect our physical and emotional selves.
But you know, no matter how cool the technology gets, it all comes back to this one timeless truth. As this quote says, the foundation of any and all healing is a safe, trusting, connected relationship. That human connection, that's the thing that offers real comfort and hope when our world feels like it's falling apart.
And that leaves us with a final thought. A challenge, really. We live in a world that feels more and more fractured, more disconnected every day. We see it everywhere. So the real question for all of us is this. Knowing what we now know about the incredible power of connection, how can we, each of us, choose to be that safe harbor for someone else? How can we be the connection that somebody needs?